Good evening. The date is Tuesday, February 3rd, 2026. If you were to look at a standard political map of East Africa tonight, the borders would appear exactly as they did a month ago. The lines are drawn in the same ink, the capital cities are in the same places. But make no mistake, the ground beneath those borders is shifting, and it's shifting with a velocity we really haven't seen in decades. From the arid plains of Somaliland to the frantic diplomatic corridors of Cairo, and stretching all the way to a courtroom in Minnesota, the old order is quietly but, well, violently coming apart.
It is a moment of profound realignment. We're seeing a convergence of military ambition, resource scarcity, and terror financing that is completely rewriting the playbook for the Horn of Africa.
Tonight, our objective is not to generate alarm, nor is it to speculate on what might happen in some distant future. Our mission is clarity. We are here to examine the facts as they stand, to understand the perspectives of the decision-makers moving the pieces, and to trace the invisible lines connecting all these global events. I'm your host, and joining me to help navigate these complex waters is our senior foreign correspondent and analyst. Welcome.
It's good to be with you. It has been a fortnight of incredible density in terms of information.
Before we open the dossier, a word on the intelligence powering this deep dive. We're sponsored by ProWave AI, and the analysis you're about to hear is generated by Stylo News. Now, for those listening who might check their phone for headlines, Stylo News is the consumer-facing application of the Stylo Intel Ops software.
Which is a significant distinction.
It is.
This is technology that was originally architected for enterprise operations, government agencies, military command, the high-level business sector. It's designed to support global decision-makers who, frankly, cannot afford to be wrong.
Precisely. So what you're hearing tonight isn't just a summary of the morning papers. It's an application of pattern-of-life analysis and multi-source triangulation that used to be the sole province of generals and CEOs. We're taking that high-grade lens and focusing it directly on the Horn of Africa. Let's begin with the catalyst. On December 26, 2025, the status quo was shattered. Israel officially recognized Somaliland as an independent state.
An historic move.
But let's pause on the context here. Somaliland declared independence from Somalia back in 1991. For 35 years, they have functioned as a state, but no nation would officially recognize them. Israel just broke that seal. The question is, why now? This seems like a massive diplomatic gamble for Tel Aviv. They're effectively alienating the official government in Mogadishu. Is this a calculated risk, or is it an act of desperation?
It's a calculation driven by hard security needs, not desperation. You have to look at the map. Israel is looking at the Red Sea and seeing a choke point that is increasingly hostile, largely due to Houthi activity from Yemen. By recognizing Somaliland, Israel isn't just making a friend, they are securing access to the port of Berbera. They need a reliable foothold in the Horn of Africa to secure their maritime trade routes. It's a classic enemy of my enemy strategy, you know. But the enemy in this case is geography and Iranian proxies.
So they're trading diplomatic goodwill in Mogadishu for concrete security on the water. But physics applies to geopolitics as well. Every action has a reaction. The government in Somalia didn't just issue a press release, they viewed this as an attack on their sovereignty. And they aren't the only ones moving troops.
No, and this is where the situation becomes combustible. This recognition opened the door for Egypt to step in, and aggressively. Cairo has deployed thousands of troops and military advisors to Somalia in the last 2 weeks alone.
But help me understand the Egyptian motivation here. Is President Sisi sending thousands of soldiers just to protect Somalia's honor? That seems unlikely given Egypt's own economic constraints.
You're right to be skeptical. This has almost nothing to do with Somalia and everything to do with Ethiopia. Egypt and Ethiopia are locked in a bitter, really an existential dispute over the grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and the Nile water rights.
Of course.
And Ethiopia has also been courting Somaliland for sea access. So Egypt sees Israel and Ethiopia making moves in the Horn, and they feel encircled. By putting boots on the ground in Somalia, Egypt is flanking Ethiopia. They're saying, if you mess with our water, we will park an army on your border.
It sounds less like a peacekeeping mission and more like a setup for a proxy war. And the board is getting even more crowded. We have reports of Turkey deploying 3 F-16 fighter jets to Mogadishu.
Correct, and they're expanding counterterrorism support. Turkey has invested heavily in Somalia for over a decade, building infrastructure, training police. They've used Somalia as their sphere of influence. But there's a commercial angle, too. Ankara plans to start offshore drilling operations in Somali waters this year, 2026.
So they're protecting a future investment.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's look at the teams here. On one side, you have this emerging axis of Israel and the UAE working through Somaliland. On the other, you have a strange convergence of Turkey, Egypt, and the federal government of Somalia trying to hold the line.
It is effectively a Cold War dynamic in the Red Sea. All these external powers, Israel, Egypt, Turkey, the UAE, are maneuvering their chess pieces around the Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
One of the world's most critical shipping lanes.
Critical. If that closes, the global economy catches a cold. They're all posturing to ensure they are the ones holding the keys.
It's easy to move pieces around on a map when you're sitting in a palace in Cairo or a situation room in Tel Aviv. But for the people living on that map, this isn't abstract strategy. It's a very hot, very immediate war. While the diplomats have been arguing over recognition, Al-Shabaab has been busy.
Chaos is a ladder for insurgents, and Al-Shabaab is climbing it. They've exploited this diplomatic distraction to launch new offensives. Just recently, we saw a major assault on the town of Kutha in Lower Juba.
Though in that instance, the line held.
It did. Somali National Army Special Forces, backed by Jubaland regional troops, they repelled the assault. Reports indicate over 130 militants were killed. That is a significant tactical victory, but it shows the scale of the force Al-Shabaab can still muster. They aren't a ragtag group, they're fielding army-sized units.
And that violence doesn't respect borders. On January 26th, the war spilled into Kenya. In Huluko, Garissa County, militants launched a dawn attack, and they didn't target a military base. They killed a local chief and a primary school teacher.
That target selection is chilling. When you kill a teacher and a local administrator, you're trying to dismantle the state itself. You're telling the population the government cannot teach your children and it cannot govern your village.
Right.
The fallout from that specific attack is potentially catastrophic for the region. The Teachers Service Commission in Kenya is currently reviewing safety protocols.
Which is bureaucratic language for pulling everyone out.
Exactly. We are facing a mass transfer of non-local teachers out of northeastern Kenya. If that happens, the education system in the entire region effectively collapses. You create a generation of uneducated youth with no economic prospects, which is exactly the recruiting pool Al-Shabaab wants.
A strategic strike on the future of Kenya.
Yes.
Meanwhile, the United States is watching this deterioration and, well, reaching for its wallet. We have reports of a $70 million investment to expand the runway at Mandabey Air Base in Kenya.
That is a clear signal of digging in. Mandabey is the nerve center for U.S. operations in East Africa. By expanding that runway, the U.S. is preparing for heavier aircraft, a more sustained operational tempo. It reinforces Kenya's status as a major non-NATO ally.
But they are using that hardware.
Aggressively. AFRICOM conducted at least 23 airstrikes in January alone, targeting Al-Shabaab and ISIS Somalia. So while the State Department issues press releases, the Pentagon is flying combat sorties.
You know, we often talk about these conflicts as if they're contained over there. We look at the map of the Horn of Africa and think the distance protects us. But in a globalized economy, financial flows connect everything. And here is where the story takes a disturbing turn towards the American Midwest. While the U.S. military is spending millions to bomb Al-Shabaab, it turns out U.S. tax dollars might have been inadvertently funding them.
This is a story that should be on every front page. A complex investigation spearheaded by a former U.S. Navy intelligence officer has uncovered a massive fraud scheme centered in Minnesota.
We're talking about the daycare fraud scandal.
Yes, but fraud makes it sound like simple theft. This was strategic. The investigation reveals that hundreds of millions of dollars, money specifically for child nutrition programs and daycares, was siphoned off. And the investigative trail tracks these illicit funds moving through Hawala networks and financial channels directly into the hands of Al-Shabaab in Somalia.
Let's process that for a moment. The U.S. taxpayer is paying for airstrikes to kill terrorists in Somalia, and simultaneously, through a lack of oversight, the U.S. taxpayer was providing the funds those terrorists use to buy weapons.
It's a closed loop of dysfunction. The criticism being leveled at Minnesota state officials is that their oversight was so lax, so negligent, that they allowed a pipeline of terror financing to operate right under their noses. It highlights a critical vulnerability. We often look for terror funding in shadowy oil deals or drug smuggling, but sometimes it comes from exploiting the social safety net of the very country you're fighting.
A staggering failure of governance with lethal consequences thousands of miles away. Speaking of governance, or the lack thereof, let's look at the diplomatic landscape in Mogadishu. It seems to be in lockdown.
Quite literally. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was scheduled to visit Mogadishu recently. Now, Wang Yi is not a man who cancels trips easily. China prides itself on going where the West won't.
Right.
but the visit was scrapped.
Because of the security threat.
A citywide security lockdown made the visit untenable. Think about the signal it sends. Despite the Turkish drones, the Egyptian troops, the U.S. airstrikes, and the Somali army's efforts, the capital city was not safe enough for a diplomatic visit.
If you can't secure the road from the airport for a VIP, you don't control the environment.
Precisely.
While Mogadishu is in lockdown, neighboring Uganda has just concluded an election. President Yoweri Museveni has claimed a seventh term with nearly 72% of the vote.
A result that surprised absolutely no one who follows Ugandan politics.
But the process was, let's call it opaque.
Opaque is generous. The internet was shut down. The opposition leader, Bobi Wine, has alleged abduction and widespread fraud. Protests were crushed before they could even start.
And yet the Western condemnation has been somewhat muted. We see the usual statements of concern, but no real action. Why?
Because of Somalia. This is the dilemma of Western policy in Africa. Museveni is a key security partner. His troops are the backbone of the African Union peacekeeping mission fighting Al-Shabaab. The U.S. and the EU are making a calculated trade-off. They are willing to tolerate democratic backsliding in Uganda because they need Museveni's army to hold the line against terror next door.
It's pragmatism over principle.
A familiar story. Stability is valued over democracy.
However, Germany seems to be trying to chart a slightly different course. German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul visited Kenya and Ethiopia recently.
Germany is carving out a specific lane. Wadephul's visit was fascinating because of what he didn't support. He used the platform to reaffirm Germany's commitment to the UN and NATO frameworks. This is a subtle but clear distancing from U.S. President Trump's proposal for a new Board of Peace.
So while Washington is looking to rewrite the international order, Berlin is hugging the old one tighter?
Exactly. Germany is signaling that they know the current multilateral institutions are flawed, but they are terrified of what replaces them. They're sticking to the established rules rather than experimenting with new alliances in a volatile region.
We've discussed the generals, the politicians, the spies, but we need to look at the ground itself. The environment is driving this crisis just as much as the politics. The drought in the region is reaching, well, biblical proportions.
It's a slow-motion disaster that doesn't get enough airtime. In Mandera County, Kenya, they haven't seen significant rainfall since May 2025.
May of last year.
Imagine that. Nearly a year without rain, we're looking at over 2 million people facing acute food insecurity.
And in these regions, livestock is the economy.
It's the bank account, the food source, the retirement plan, and the livestock are dying. When people lose their livelihood, they become desperate. And desperate young men are the easiest targets for Al-Shabaab recruiters. You cannot bomb your way out of a drought.
And yet, there is this jarring disconnect. While Mandera dries up, Nairobi is hosting Intersolar Africa 2026, positioning itself as a renewable energy hub.
It is a tale of two realities. Kenya is aggressively pursuing solar technology, trying to leapfrog into a green economy. It shows the resilience of the nation, but it also highlights the vulnerability. Just look at the transport sector. Kenya Airways recently had to cancel flights to New York.
And not because of the drought or terror attacks?
No, because of severe snowstorms in the U.S. A reminder that we are all connected, whether by weather patterns or wire transfers.
Speaking of that connection, the U.S. administration has made a significant policy shift regarding Somalis living in America. Secretary Kristi Noem has announced the end of temporary protected status, or TPS, for about 1,100 Somali immigrants.
Effective March 2026. The official citation from the Department of Homeland Security is improved conditions in Somalia.
Hold on. We just spent the last 10 minutes discussing airstrikes, citywide lockdowns that scared off the Chinese foreign minister, and a looming proxy war. How can the administration claim conditions have improved?
It's a glaring contradiction. To claim conditions are safe enough for repatriation while simultaneously spending $70 million to expand a base for combat operations because the terror threat is so high. The logic simply does not hold water.
So why do it?
It suggests the decision is driven by domestic U.S. immigration policy goals, the hardline approach, rather than an objective, intelligence-based assessment of safety in Mogadishu. The left hand doesn't seem to care what the right hand is bombing.
I want to use the Stylo News engine now to dig a little deeper. One of the unique features of Stylo is the ability to analyze pattern of life and sentiment across thousands of sources. When we look at the data, how are the key players viewing this situation?
The data shows a distinct fragmentation of reality. If you look at the Israeli data streams, the Somaliland recognition is viewed as an existential necessity, a survival move. If you switch to the Somali government sources, that same act is an existential threat. There's zero overlap in their perceptions.
And the sentiment analysis. What are people saying on the ground?
This is where it gets interesting. Social media analysis shows broad public support for multilateralism. People want the UN and the African Union to step in and fix this. But underneath that, there's a rising pattern of life indicator fear. There's a palpable spike in anxiety regarding a proxy war. The sentiment data shows that people in Mogadishu are terrified that their city is about to become the battlefield for Cairo and Addis Ababa to settle their scores.
And how is the media covering it? A source like the New American versus, say, Hurriyet.
We see massive divergence. If you read sources like the New American, the algorithm shows a heavy focus on the Minnesota fraud scandal. For that audience, the story is domestic corruption. But if you look at regional sources like Hurriyet, the coverage is almost exclusively about Turkey's strategic expansion and the drill ships. The narrative you get depends entirely on where you look.
Which is why having a tool that aggregates all of them is so critical. Looking ahead, what should our listeners be watching for in the next few weeks or months?
The timeline for the Somalia 2026 elections is the immediate flashpoint. We have to watch if the security situation allows for anything resembling a credible vote. If the lockdown in Mogadishu continues, holding an election becomes a farce.
And on the economic front?
Watch the water. Watch for the Turkish drill ships. If Turkey actually begins offshore drilling in Somali waters in 2026 as planned, that could trigger a naval confrontation. We've seen how aggressive Turkey can be over maritime resources in the Mediterranean. If they bring that energy to the Indian Ocean, things could get kinetic very quickly.
And I understand there's a new business angle emerging as well.
Yes, involving the Trump family. We saw reports of Eric Trump meeting with Somaliland's president. They were discussing private sector investment in livestock and agriculture.
That is significant. If U.S. private capital follows the Israeli diplomatic recognition, it changes the game.
Completely. Diplomatic notes are one thing. Significant foreign direct investment is another. If American business interests plant a flag in Somaliland, it cements that independence in a way that Mogadishu will find very hard to reverse.
And finally, a quick note on sports, which usually unites people. The AFCON 2027 tournament.
Pushed to August 2027. It's a reminder that big events require boring things like roads, stadiums, and safety. The infrastructure readiness in East Africa is under immense strain, and the delay is an admission of that reality.
This depth of intelligence, connecting a canceled flight in Nairobi to a snowstorm in New York, a fraud case in Minnesota to a drone strike in Kismayo, and seeing the invisible threads between them, this used to be classified. It used to be information reserved for the Situation Room.
It was. But the landscape of information has democratized. The signals are out there, if you have the right receiver.
And that is where Stylo News comes in. You can download the Stylo News app right now on your mobile or computer. It allows you to get personal, intelligence-style briefs, just like the one we just delivered, culled from hundreds of traditional sources and platforms like X. It cuts through the noise and gives you the signal. You can subscribe at www.stylonews.com for on-demand, AI-powered news.
In a world moving this fast, ignorance is a choice. Stylo helps you make a different one.
We want to thank you for tuning into this deep dive. We hope this briefing has provided some clarity on a rapidly evolving region and perhaps made the world feel a little bit smaller and more understandable.
Stay curious, keep questioning the narrative, and look for the connections that others might miss.
If there are topics you want us to cover in future deep dives, please let us know. We build this show for you. Follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe. Good night.